Today we're going to explore one of rock and roll's coolest guitars. The player is Brian May. The guitar in question is his homemade Red Special. The Red Special is the guitar that Brian is most associated with, and for good reason. In 1970, Brian's band called Smile hired a new singer named Freddie Mercury, and they changed their name to Queen. Queen has released 15 studio albums and toured the world over a dozen times. And you hear the Red Special on every album, and he's brought it on every tour. Brian May used the Red Special to create his legendary and unmistakable guitar tone. But before he did all of that, Brian Harold May was born July 19, 1947 in Hampton, London, England. His mother was Scottish, and his father Harold was a draftsman at the Ministry of Aviation. Harold May was also an electronics engineer and craftsman who built the family's TV set, radio, and their stereo, among other things. Brian's first guitar was a small-bodied Egmond acoustic. Once he heard players like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck playing, he knew he needed to go electric. Brian is also a fan of Hank Marvin of the Shadows, saying, "I was obsessed with the way Hank Marvin of the Shadows made his guitar sound," referring to his use of the vibrato arm. Brian says that the family couldn't afford a Fender or a Gibson. They couldn't even afford the copies made by Hofner. For reference, according to the 1963 Fender catalog, a Stratocaster with a Tremolo cost $349.50, which would be around $3,000 today, depending on which inflation calculator you use. And it was probably even more with the import taxes and shipping fees to England. So that's an expensive guitar for a teenager. Since the family couldn't afford an electric guitar, Brian and Harold decided to build their own guitar from scratch, using mostly things they had around their home. According to Brian, it was like, make a guitar, and that's the only way. So that was it. Having taken up the challenge, it was, let's make something better than anything that's ever been out there. Because me and my dad had that kind of attitude. If it's worth doing to the max, you know? The Red Special, also known as the Old Lady and the Fireplace guitar, was built by Brian and his father Harold over a period of nearly 2 years from 1963 to 64. Brian was 16 when they started. The name The Old Lady comes from one of his guitar techs saying that taking care of the guitar was like taking care of a wife. But Brian didn't care for that. His father suggested calling it the Brian May Special, but he didn't like that either. The Fireplace nickname is because part of the guitar is in fact made from wood from the family's fireplace. Then, during an interview, someone asked him the name and he just blurted out, the Red Special, and it stuck. Now what is the Red Special? What's it made from, and how is it different than other guitars that were available in the mid-1960s? Let's find out. Because Brian was so familiar with his acoustic guitar, he wanted his electric to have a similar shape with a thick neck and low frets. He designed it with a double cutaway so he could reach the upper frets. He says in his book about the Red Special that he wanted a guitar with multiple pickups and a tremolo. And he wanted it to be able to feed back to increase the sustain. He didn't understand why most guitars were only 21 or 22 frets instead of 24, which gives you the double octave. Once he had settled on the design, he and his dad set to work on building the guitar over the next 2 years. The body of the guitar is a combination of an oak center and blockboard wood surrounding. The oak is from a spare table. They chose oak because it's a hard wood, and they figured that it would be strong enough to handle the string tension while being only the center mass of the body. The rest of the body is made from blockboard, and Brian chiseled the cavities himself. He wanted it to be hollow, both to house the electronics and just to hold air, so that he could get feedback. He was inspired by Jeff Beck and Pete Townsend, who used feedback in their playing as part of their sound. That's why he designed his guitar with an acoustic pocket. Brian intended the guitar to be semi-acoustic with an F-hole, but the guitar works so well he felt he didn't need it. It is in the designs though. The outline of the body is made of blockboard. Blockboard is made of strips of various sized pieces of wood glued together and sandwiched between 2 sheets of plywood. According to Brian, there is a very solid piece of oak which is the main strain bearer of the guitar in here, but it's enveloped in veneer, and the main part of the body is hollow, and it's made of blockboard covered with veneer. The top, sides, and back of the guitar are mahogany veneer that Brian got from a local shop. He used to play with marquetry kits, so he was familiar with veneers. Marquetry kits have pieces of colored wood that you use to make pictures. This was popular before people had invented fun. They used cascamite, a powdered urea formaldehyde resin-based wood adhesive, which Brian says gets, quote, slightly absorbed into the wood and you have to clamp it really tightly until it's dry. But once it's dry, it'll never move again. None of that veneer has ever moved or detached itself even the slightest bit. For the color, they used a wood dye and then applied many layers of Rustin's plastic coating, which resulted in a dark reddish brown color. And Brian used sandpaper to give it a glassy finish. For the binding of the body, they used white plastic from some shelves. Binding wasn't something you could just buy at a guitar store in 1963, so Brian and his dad used edging, the kind you'd put on shelves, and Brian cut it and heated it up in a bowl of warm water and gradually shaped it. He used an Evo stick, which is a contact adhesive. Binding is both decorative and practical because it provides a more resilient edge to the guitar while looking good too. The pickguard was made of black perspex, which was an early plastic. He designed it so that you could remove the pickguard and it would not disrupt any of the internal components of the guitar. For the tremolo, they came up with the idea of balancing the pull of the strings with two motorbike valve springs set underneath the trem. There are two screws on the backside of the guitar that you can use to adjust the tension. The idea to add a tremolo, aka vibrato unit, to the guitar was inspired, of course, by Hank Marvin of the Shadows, who Brian is a big fan of. The bridge assembly floats in the middle position, so Brian can push down or pull up with the whammy bar, and it returns to its 0 point and stays in tune. The bridge rocks on a knife edge made from a piece of case-hardened steel. The bridge blocks were homemade out of a single piece of aluminum. Instead of saddles, the bridge has tiny rollers, which help reduce the friction and keep the strings in tune when using the whammy bar. Brian made these by hand, of course. He even made his own hand-powered lathe. So not only did he make the guitar, he even made some of the tools to make the guitar. The tremolo arm is made of milled steel and the support from a saddlebag from a bicycle. The tip is made from part of his mother's knitting needle. Brian wanted a whammy, and he knew that friction would be an obstacle to the strings returning to pitch after using the vibrato arm. The roller bridge he and Harold designed solved the problem at the bridge end. According to Brian, I thought the way to do it would be to have them go through a very shallow gradient so there wouldn't be very much friction anywhere. Basically, there's no bottom to the slots in the nut. The strings just float in the nut located vertically by the 0 fret. He didn't want lateral deviation of the strings when they pass through the nut. This is why the headstock is shaped like a lozenge to best position the machine heads. He says it was only possible because the nut was separate from the 0 fret. So what's a 0 fret? The 0 fret is a fret used in place of a typical guitar string nut. A 0 fret is placed on the instrument's fretboard where the nut would usually sit. The strings anchor to this fret and vibrate off of it rather than a string nut. Directly behind the 0 fret is what looks like a regular guitar nut with extra deep slots. This isn't a string nut though, but a string guide. The string guide maintains the spacing of the strings from side to side. The headstock was designed so that the strings can go almost laterally and vertically so that they don't rub on the sides of the nut's grooves. There is also often a custom Brian May sixpence stuck to the headstock. Brian went to a hardware shop on the Thames and bought some Eclipse button magnets. Harold built a pickup winder with a revolution counter, which was really a mileometer from a bicycle, to know how many turns of copper wire were on the pickup. The homemade pickups made kind of a rushing noise when bending a string, So Brian went to Burns' guitar shop in St. Charles Circus and bought 3 now famous TriSonic pickups, and they cost 3 guineas each. A guinea is a coin minted in Great Britain between 1663 and 1814. It contained approximately 1/4 of an ounce of gold. The name comes from the country in West Africa where the gold is said to have come from. Even though Britain is no longer on a gold standard, the guinea became a colloquial term used in the medical and legal fields, as well as in horse and dog racing.
Do you like dogs? Dogs. What?
Yeah, dogs.
Dogs. Do you like dogs?
According to Brian, the pickups did feedback on their own, making an unpleasant whistle, because they acted to some extent like microphones. So I took them apart and filled them up with araldite to make them solid. According to Wikipedia, the Burns TriSonic is a single coil pickup with ceramic isotropic ferrite magnets and a chrome cover. The TriSonic pickups are wider than the more popular single coil pickups designed by Fender. Brian favors using the bridge and middle pickups together in phase. That gives me a great chord sound with the AC30s and also quite a bit of fatness, great for soloing. It's great for almost anything depending on where the volume is. The pickups are all wired in series rather than the more usual parallel, and all 3 pickups can be on at the same time. According to Brian, the output is added together when wired in series, meaning that with all 3 pickups turned on, the output is tripled. The top row of switches turns each of the 3 pickups on or off. The bottom row reverses the polarity of each pickup, changing the phase. There are 13 switching combinations in the Red Special, 14 if you include turning off the pickups and using that as a kill switch. This is far more than your standard 3-position Gibson or even 5-position Strat, which would have only been 3 positions in the 1960s, though of course people were experimenting with those half positions with the Strat already. When I put the bridge and middle pickups together in phase, something special happens for me. It's hard to describe, but this setting has just enough warmth and bite to make the sound thick and solid, but there's just enough brightness to give it clarity and a healthy mixture of harmonics. Brian says that's his favorite combination, though he does use a variety of other settings for different songs. For Bohemian Rhapsody, he uses the neck and middle pickups. The neck pickup phase switches down and the middle is up, so the sound is out of phase and humbucking. For the controls, there's 1 volume, 1 tone. Brian bought the original knobs, but they were cheap, so he made better knobs with a lathe while at Imperial College. The inside of the control cavity is shielded with copper foil. The truss rod was anchored on a massive bolt, which also fastens the neck onto the body, so tightening it up really held the neck rigid. The truss rod is made of black perspex, which is the same material that the Pickguard is made of. Brian designed the guitar to be 24 frets. He thought it was strange that most guitars stopped at 22 frets, just 2 frets shy of a double octave. The neck of the guitar is mahogany from the family's 18th century fireplace mantel. There were 2 wormholes that he filled up with matchsticks. Brian carved the fretboard out of 1 flat piece of oak and shaped it into a curved profile using stacks of sandpaper. He wanted ebony for the fretboard but couldn't afford it, so he added layers of Ruston's plastic coating and sandpapered it down until it was smooth. The scale length is 24 inches and there are 24 frets. Brian bought the fret wire for 3 pence a foot at a shop in Cambridge Circus called Banjo, Mandolin, and Guitar. Brian filed down each fret individually and glued them onto the fretboard. He even made his own fret curving clamp to get the perfect curve for the fret wire. Brian worked at EMI Weapons Department during his school holidays, and he had access to one of the first computers in the world. In his book, he says that he wrote a computer program to determine the best fret positions. True story. Nerd! The radius is 7¼ inches. According to Brian's book, the dots were made from buttons for his shirts that my mum had saved in a special mysterious button box. The buttons were made of mother of pearl. There are 2 dots on the 7th and 19th frets, and 3 dots on the 12th and 24th. Brian filed the buttons down himself for the dot inlays. Brian famously uses a metal coin instead of a guitar pick. The coin is called a sixpence, and it was introduced in 1551 and used as currency until 1971, but continued to be legal tender after that. Brian prefers the sound that the sixpence produces and the feel of the hard metal versus a soft plastic guitar pick. He also uses the serrated edge of the coin to give it a different voice. You can see the coin dust that's left behind after a gig that his guitar tech has to clean. He likes the sixpence because, according to Brian, they don't wear out and they don't hurt the strings because it's softer than steel. It's like nickel silver and they last forever. I have 1,000 of them. Also, they don't get stuck under the string. In the 1970s, Brian used a Dallas Rangemaster treble booster. Now he uses a version from Knight Technologies that he straps to his guitar strap. The original Rangemasters are too heavy to strap to your guitar, so Knight Technologies took the same circuit, added a few tweaks, and now they're light enough to strap on. Brian got the idea to use the Rangemaster from Rory Gallagher. Rory is the one who told Brian about the Dallas Rangemaster and Vox amps, and Rory said that he loved Vox because they just speak. Brian had a Vox fuzz box that he took out of the case and placed inside the guitar's body. But after a year, he decided that he preferred the sound of an overdriven amplifier and removed it. Considering that Brian May has been touring the world for decades with this guitar, it's truly amazing that it's still in one piece and has never been stolen. In 2007, May earned his PhD in astrophysics from Imperial College London after only 36 years of study. In 2005, he was made a Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. I think we can all agree that Brian May is an innovator, a great guitar player, and a smarty pants. Thanks for watching this video and have a great day. Please like and subscribe.